Your four favorites are Adaptation, The Big Lebowski, The Royal Tenenbaums, and The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. You saw most of the movies that would have been my top choices, so some of these might be a stretch, but I tried my best. Seven Psychopaths is a self-reflexive film about a screenwriter struggling to write his next script, like Adaptation. It's a comedic crime film like The Big Lebowski, and it has an ensemble cast like The Royal Tenenbaums and Return of the King. The combination of Adaptation and Return of the King makes me think you'd like Heavenly Creatures. Like Adaptation, Heavenly Creatures is about a couple of writers, and it was inspired by actual events. And like Return of the King, it was directed by Peter Jackson and involves an elaborate fantasy world. While I'm on the topic of fantasy worlds, The Fall is a fantasy adventure film like Return of the King, and it involves someone who works in the film industry like Adaptation. Confessions of a Dangerous Mind is a crime film that's sort of a comedy like The Big Lebowski, and it's based on a semi-autobiographical book, and Adaptation is a semi-autobiographical film, and the screenplay was written by Charlie Kaufman, who wrote Adaptation. Speaking of Charlie Kaufman, he wrote and directed Synecdoche, New York, which I also think you'd like. I also wanted to recommend a film with twin brothers since you like Adaptation, and Leaves of Grass is probably closer in tone, but I prefer Dead Ringers, so I guess you can take your pick. The ending of Adaptation was definitely inspired by the ending of Happy Together. I've recommended The Long Goodbye to other people with The Big Lebowski in their favorites, so I won't go into detail about that one. But another movie where Jeff Bridges is unexpectedly pulled into a series of strange events involving some criminal activity and bizarre people is Winter Kills. But I also think you might enjoy After Hours, North by Northwest, and Under the Silver Lake. The Royal Tenenbaums was inspired by the Magnificent Ambersons. There's a scene where Royal Tenenbaum, played by Gene Hackman, takes his grandkids out and they ride go-karts under a bridge. And the way it's shot reminds me of a chase scene in another Gene Hackman film, The French Connection. I tend to recommend Noah Baumbach movies to people with Wes Anderson films in their favorites when they've already seen Wes Anderson's entire filmography, but I couldn't decide which one I wanted to recommend to you. So I'll say The Squid and the Whale because Wes Anderson was one of the producers, and The Meyerowitz Stories because Ben Stiller is also in this one. It's always difficult when someone has a Lord of the Rings movie or something from another big franchise in their favorites like Star Wars, Harry Potter, or a superhero film, because I feel like the only comparable recommendations would be from another big franchise, and usually the person has already seen those. But I noticed you didn't have The Terminator marked as watched. I know it's very different from The Lord of the Rings, but there's a pretty important scene in Return of the King that reminds me of a scene in Terminator 2 Judgment Day, and I also think you might like Seven Samurai.